Hello everyone, how are you doing? I'm doing well. I advise you to subscribe to the channel and put a like, did you do? Great. Now I propose to peppervy it to the topic of the video we have today is not usual, namely, what's one profession you wouldn't want to date? Story 1. Story 2. 911 caller of officers dispatched to our house. I was rear-ended once. Called 911, came out. Talked to the blonde that hit me at length. When I was making the claim, the insurance company told me that my story did not line up with police report as there isn't one. Fortunately, it lined up with the claim from the girl's insurance company. I went to the police station to ask for the report. They said they had no record of the report or the call at all. I guess he was trying to get a date out of her, so she tried to hook her up. Fortunately for me, she was honest and told her claims adjuster that she hit me. Otherwise, I would have been on the hook for sustaining damages to the rear of my car while at stop. I remember the Geico yelling at me, "Why were you stopped at the highway exit?" To which I just said because there was a stop sign at the end of it. Just the fucking multi-layered dip of corruption. Story 3. I can only speak from my own experience of dating in these professions. 1. Hospital-based nurses. They're fucking incredible, truly. But the working hours are long, mentally and physically draining, and often they have no time or energy to do anything. That's without mentioning unexpected overtime, etc. Meaning that 8 p.m. finish ends up being an 11 p.m. finish and they're back in at 6 a.m. So never date another hospital nurse. 2. Anything finance. Dated 2 women who worked in finance. Both were highly stressed at all times and didn't seem able to switch off. I'd book a nice long weekend away, and they'd be on their phone constantly to their boss or a colleague talking shop. It's unbearable. 3. Police ambulance service. Similar to hospital-based nurses, really. Long hours, unsociable hours, high stress, little downtime, days off and working hours constantly changing, staying late constantly. Honestly, I wouldn't wish those jobs on my worst enemy. They're completely unforgiving on your personal life. 4. Military. I'm ex-RAF myself, and times like this, when things are relatively quiet, it's no bother at all. Oftentimes they're finished by 5 p.m. every weekend off. But when I was we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that shit was not conducive to maintaining your relationships. It's such fucking hard work. I deployed twice. Both times my then-girlfriends broke up with me while I was away, citing the stress and anxiety, worry for my safety, etc. And I totally understood, to be honest. It can be easy. Story 4. School admins are required to be at work all day, and then at various other events every evening and often on weekends. They pull crazy, terrible hours and the job sucks. It's completely thankless and gets shit on from parents, kids, higher admin, community groups, teachers, etc. I went into teaching wanting to be an admin. Within a year, I decided that life is not for me or anyone really, which is why school admins usually suck at their job. Nobody with passion or talent wants to do it because they see how terrible it is. Story 5. Many states don't require a court order for a vehicle to be towed, which gives tow truck drivers room to operate extremely unethically and has bred resentment for the entire profession. In Texas, for example, tow companies can steal vehicles without even having to notify the police, have formed something of a cartel, where if a lot owner or business owner ever needs towing services, they have to sign contracts that allow the company to tow any car that they deem inappropriately parked, even if the lot owner explicitly tells them not to. And due to a lack of consumer protection, once they've stolen your vehicle, you have to pay to fight them in court and prove you weren't improperly parked. Meanwhile, they don't have to prove shit. In states with poor consumer protections, the tow truck driver is not a friendly sight to see 95% of the time. They also cause auto accidents due to them racing to crash sites to be the first one on the scene to pull the wreck away and driving unsafely to do so. They've caused so many accidents and deaths by trying to get there first that some states have passed regulations saying you can't get paid for the tow unless emergency services specifically tell you, and you alone, to come out and tow it. They then revolve through a list of licensed drivers so everyone gets a fair shake. Story 6. I looked it up out of curiosity, and your characterization of the study appears false. The officers were asked if they had ever gotten out of control and behaved violently against their spouse and children in the last 6 months. We did not define the type of violence. Thus, violence could have been interpreted as verbal or physical threats or actual physical abuse. Approximately 40% said that in the last 6 months prior to the survey, They had behaved violently towards their spouse or children. So the 40 in this study is police officers self-reporting whether they had gotten out of control and behaved violently against their spouse and children. It's possible that some of those 40 meant verbal violence. It did not explicitly include raising your voice, and it appears speculative whether anyone ever actually thought that. It also seems possible that some cops answered no, because the question said against their spouse and children and they only ever beat their spouse. I don't see any good reason to twist the survey findings as you did, to try to make it sound like it didn't include 40 of cops saying they had used violence on their spouses or kids. Story 7. I'm a nurse. I don't drink. I work every night. I rarely eat more than one meal per day. I work in a pretty demanding field currently and no one that I work with is like this. Lol. Most of them do drink, but not nightly. I don't drink at all. Only one of the nurses I work with is overweight. But in every setting I've ever worked, we rarely ate more than one meal per day because we never had time. And very few were overweight because we're on our feet the entire shift and running around taking care of people. It's not really a career field where you can sit around and eat all day. LOL. This is a pretty bad generalization. Yeah, it's stressful, but this is a weird assumption to me. Story 8. Definitely no oilfield workers for several reasons. Just to start, there's West Texas single, which is where they pretend to be single while out working, but have a whole ass family back home. Second is the boom and bust nature where they make a stupid amount of money for a short period, but spend it all partying in a hotel room and on frivolous fun. They'll spend way too much on a house at the top of a bubble in a town with no other commerce. Then an area gets filled out and doesn't need new holes administrative changes that push the work to another region. Eventually the company goes bankrupt, sells off the fleet, and cans the workers only to buy its own equipment under a new name and start up again further away. This leaves the employee with a broken body, little savings, no experience with anything else, and an unwillingness to do anything that pays less in a town that can't support an economy for everyone. They'll spend their days drinking on the couch, blaming Obama and drowning in debt because they were foolish enough to think the gravy train would never go elsewhere. Story 9. Surprised to not see this more than once. I'm generalizing based on the nurses I know, but they seem to be generally unhealthy. Usually borderline alcoholic or other substance abuse issues, often overweight and mildly psychotic or sociopathic at minimum. It has to be a terrible profession. Work super long, odd hours dealing with super sick people, mentally ill people, trauma, etc. I know they eat like mad as the floors have constant potluck-style parties and it's probably a coping mechanism. Alcohol to distress after work, come home and sleep until next shift. Seems terrible for the nurse and their partner. Edit tossing in this edit to re-emphasize that my above comment is strictly based on my experience. As originally stated, I generalized based off the nurses I know and had worked alongside for many years. Not all nurses succumb to these difficulties. Nurses overall are outstanding human beings given they're willing to sacrifice so much for the care of others. Story 11. I'm married to a tow truck driver. He is definitely one of the good ones. And that feedback comes from his customers, but there are definitely very shady and crude drivers out there that just act ignorant. My husband would give you the shirt off his back off you needed it more than he did. He has an excellent relationship with the police and the highway maintenance companies. Good Google reviews on him too. Lol. Don't let the bad apples spoil the bunch. However, if you do not understand the industry, do not date and marry a tow truck driver. They can get called out at any time and may not make it home for supper. Plans get canceled and no promises can be made. Make sure you are ready to take care of everything at home and be the parent who will always be there for the kids because hell never know if hell actually make it. And carry a good life insurance policy on him because it's literally one of the most dangerous jobs out there. Story 12. This is the first thing that popped into my mind as well for so many reasons. I'm a queer, alternative-looking woman who smokes pot. A lot of cops are conservative. A lot of cops are white supremacists. A lot of cops don't believe women because they don't like or respect them, same with BIPOC and queer people. A lot of people with ASPD find jobs where they have power over people, and one of those jobs is commonly police work. Someone else commented a simple but poignant like that just said 40. 40 is the reported number of cops that beat their spouses, and remember, that's just the reported number. I shudder to think what the actual number is. Fuck cops. Edit dropped a word. Put it back. Story 13. Nurses. They are definitely a personality type. Went with my deal to take my 1-year-old grandson to the ear because he woke up violently shaking and we were worried about febrile seizures. Among many of the rude thing the triage nurse said, she asked my deal how much my grandson weighed. She replied, "I think about 30 or 31 pounds. Nurse replied, "Well, which is it? I need an exact weight." In an absolutely hateful tone, I whipped around and said, "Well, weigh him." Then she sputtered and started about scales. But there were baby scales right behind me and she proceeded to weigh him. My deal was in tears and it was absolutely avoidable. Had she shown the slightest bit of compassion to a first-time mom who is scared besides being a shy, soft personality? I really thought I was going to kicked out. I was so infuriated. Story 14. I have dated women that have worked a variety of occupations. I'll never date another teacher ever again. It wasn't the hours of work or lack of a work-life balance. It wasn't the general lack of financial literacy that most seem to have. It wasn't even the lack of boundaries that they had, admittedly. This could have just been related to me and not about teachers. Just that the worst offenders of girls that don't have boundaries have been the teachers. It was the incessant need to always get their way no matter what. It never mattered if they were wrong, or if they were being unreasonable or anything else. They didn't get their way and it turned into a bratty bitch fest until they got what they wanted, or enough time and distance was put forward to get them to calm the fuck down. I could never put up with that sort of shit ever again. Story 15. I learned this in the absolute hardest way. I didn't understand the truth under I help others because I need to help myself that usually comes from a lot of self-neglect and self-sabotage rooted in trauma. This spilled into the relationship in complex ways that I'm still unpacking a year later after everything blew over. I learned a lot about the tools, strategies, and even science behind talk therapy and psychology, but I had to do that largely on my own to break through what had been weaponized. The therapist would also attempt to analyze my own past and provide her own meaning into my own shit that I had worked on for years. When ID pushed back, ID be emotionally unavailable or not ready to build a relationship. And she is a prominent social media creator in the topic. I seriously do not recommend dating a therapist, lol. Story 16. It's a switch many of us can turn off and on. I'm pretty laid back and avoid arguments in my personal life. I've been called a pushover by many. In court, I have to switch into zealous advocate mode. I don't think arguing is a game. It's just a big part of the job, particularly when you are in court litigating. Mind you, there are attorneys who never step foot in court, so they're not really arguing all the time like the rest of us. I know many smart lawyers. The perfect lawyer is smart, well-organized, and charismatic. 2 out of 3 and you're a good lawyer. 1 out of 3 and well, you may be able to manage, but it's tough. Story 17. I had a FI manager who would also work the floor. Sometimes he always tried to persuade customers to lease. At first he would tell customers half of my customers lease their cars. Oh, really? Wow. The clients would say then the number was 70, then 75, then 81 time. We were working a deal together and he told the customers to their face 90 of my customers' lease. I actually let out a little giggle and had to look away momentarily. He got pissed at me later. But it was just so funny seeing that number progress into a bigger bullshit lie. There are over 84 computers in your car. Story 18. I would say the insane long hours and alcohol abuse is a much more U.S. issue than anywhere in the world. In Norway, you work 7.5 hours for a maximum of 37.540-hour work week. Some work 12-hour shifts, but workplaces can't implement these shifts without every nurse agreeing to work such hours in rotation. And you are forced to take 28 days summer vacation. And in addition, you have some weeks you agree with workplace when you want to take them. That being said, the struggle from ending an evening shift to a morning shift is hard to tackle no matter where you work as a nurse or healthcare employees in general. Story 19. When I worked in car sales, I knew a guy like this. His name was Mike and he was actually a nice guy. But when it came to customers, he would say anything he needed to make his cut just a little bit bigger, and he was good at it too. Always made me sick and think less of him. Later, I would find out that Mike had a daughter with Crohn's disease and worked so hard so he could pay for medical bills and medicine for that and all of the other medical problems she had. After that, I kind of view people that try to get money from me different. I always think they are just trying to make it in this capital hellscape like I am. Story 20. A few things. Chief among them is that nothing is nothing. An argument stems from somewhere in your past. Anger or sadness or happiness all have something tied to them. I've had entire phone calls with a behavioral therapist buddy of mine that felt like couch sessions on both our ends. You know how therapy is usually supposed to either help you or help you deal with things that harm your mental health? She's identified everything that causes her difficulty and goes right back to the well each time. Story 21. I'd ache about other countries, but here doctors have money like they truly afford everything they want after 40s. Before that, meaning during residency and a little bit after, they have oakish money. Okay, it depends on speciality like myself. For example, I work in an easy field, no overtime, and I live paycheck to paycheck. Others, like surgeons, earn a little better. The thing is, most doctors came from wealthy families. You'll see many of them having their own place before 30s, most of them living from their salary and still be helped by their parents. So for most of them, that means having money. TBF. I also met doctors who truly were 10-10, but like 5 of guys I met so far Mayo. Story 22. My soon-to-be's husband was an enlisted service member in the U.S. military. I really don't think I could ever handle another relationship with an enlisted service member. Not because of the lifestyle of the military or even the money aspect, but just, so many enlisted service members seem to have awful issues that they're so blasé about. If ever I find myself in a situation in the future where I'm entertaining the idea of a relationship with a service member, it would have to be with an officer. They seem to have a better head on their shoulders. Story 23. I totally get this sentiment, but as someone who's friends with quite a few actors and some pretty darn good ones, it's honestly super easy to tell the difference between acting and genuine emotion. Human emotion on stage and screen is so different than their real-life cues. We literally have a phrase for one of our friends' acting face she makes when she's acting, because it's so different than how she looks IRL, but it's so authentic on stage. But I honestly wouldn't date an actor either. Just imaging them in any romantic role with someone else's with really good chemistry might drive me nuts. Story 24. Is celebrity considered a profession? I know it's not a job title like actor or singer may be, but I wanted to generalize more. I couldn't stand the entire world judging my every single move, writing entire articles because I blinked twice in a row, and they wonder if I secretly have spasms or other bullshit. I couldn't have an actual relationship with the person because it'd all be fake for the news and internet and crap. Everybody always criticizing me. Thanks, but no thanks. I get enough hatred simply for being born in an era where the internet exists and people love to bully 247. I don't need to be celebrity, level popular, or dating one. Story 25. Ulmao. I used to be a FI manager for a new car dealership, so I can speak from experience when I say how miserable of a human you become. The hours are long and it's pretty high stress. I did it for 2 years and it was tough towards the end. Now I work on the lender side. I talk to fee people every day to help them get their people approvals. I can tell how miserable they are sometimes, haha. It made me pretty depressed at the time, and the day I left it was like a huge weight off my shoulders. 310 would not try again. 3 because the money is good, haha. Story 26. I have a small suspicion that nurses aren't necessarily more unhealthy than other professions, but unhealthy nurses are more memorable. Many expect people working in health fields to be more health conscious, so it stands out when you see them drinking, smoking, overweight, etc. I have a lot of relatives in nursing, and growing up I had the same but you're a nurse thought when they would talk about coworkers going out for smoke breaks, when in reality nurses are susceptible to the same vices and struggles as any other profession doing tough shift work. Story 27. I'm married to a former family law attorney. In reality, they generally recognize far better than the general public that divorce is far more destructive when you allow emotion to fuel a fight, and I find them far more likely to be reasonable and remain civil during their own divorces, having worked in his firm in the past and having several as clients. Also, I've come close to divorcing him over generally growing apart, and our discussions surrounding splitting were actually productive and cooperative, when he can be habitually oppositional but both nature and training. Story 28. I used to be a stripper, and neither myself nor any of my coworkers viewed sex with our significant others as a chore. In fact, we all had really great sex lives, and our significant others had no complaints. What we did consider a chore was small talk and the typical conversations we'd have at the club, usually about really banal stuff like sex or sports, or what someone did for a living, but sometimes we'd have intellectually stimulating conversations too. But yeah, those small talk conversations and interactions could tend to get repetitive. Story 29. Any public serving job like firefighter, EMT, paramedic, doctor, therapist, politician, or military personnel. There's too much mental, emotional, and at times physical risks that I'm not capable of handling within a relationship. People judged me a lot for it, and some people within those jobs were offended when they found out. My now husband aspired to be an MT firefighter but stopped after barely a year, almost a decade before meeting me, due to the stress and mental toll it took on him. Well, and that's all we have. I hope you liked the theme of this video. I ask you to support the channel with a like, subscribe, and kalakolchikam, well, and leave your comments. I will be glad to read them.